Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. Thank you for tuning in every week. We love hearing from y'all. So please make sure to continue to leave us comments, both on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and don't forget about our YouTube. We're going to have some really great updates on our YouTube videos. So please stay tuned for those. So today we have an amazing guest. Her name is Robin Fielder. If you haven't heard about her, you're going to be in for a treat. She is just absolutely fantastic. So let's give her a really good intro so y'all kind of understand where she came from, and then we'll get right into the questions. So Robin is the Executive Vice President of Low Carbon Strategy and Chief Sustainability Officer at Talos Energy, serving as the lead executive for Talos' rapidly growing carbon capture and CCS business, while overseeing ESG initiatives. Prior to joining Talos, Ms. Fielder served as the president, CEO, and a member of the Noble Midstream Partners Board of Directors, where she guided the partnership within Chevron. She spent a majority of her career before that at Anadarko. But what's even more extraordinary about her is during all of this time and being a amazing woman leader in this space, she's a mother of two and a cancer survivor, and she was recently recognized as the top 2022-25 influential women in energy by Heart. Robin, that is such an amazing, I'm just so glad that you're recognized for that award because you truly deserve it, and we're just so excited to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you. I'm glowing. It's very, very kind intro and happy to be here.
Thanks, Robin. So let's get into it. You grew up in Deer Park, right in the middle of the birthplace of Texas, a great place to be in the work, especially if you're into chemical or refinery businesses like your father was. And he encouraged you to go into engineering, which is really fantastic because I don't think enough parents do this, especially to young women, where they tell them, hey, you can be an engineer, you can be an astronaut, and like your parents did that. So that's wonderful that you actually took their advice and continued your career path within engineering. And he worked in the refinery business, and he encouraged you mainly because he said, Robin, they're always the bosses, So it just told you like, this is a good career path. And they didn't attend college. It wasn't within your family background that they have achieved college degree. So this was big for you that you were, one of the first to go and get a degree. Can you tell us a little bit about what life was like growing up and, what really made you pursue engineering after all?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're right. I grew up there in Deer Park, Texas. I always used to tell people it's just south of the Big Shell refinery. In fact, we used to be known as the richest school district in the state, and a lot of that was because of the large refineries there along the ship channel to help subsidize the school district. Well, over time, there was some new legislation within the state where a lot of that gets shared across different districts. But it was great. It was one of those things where back in even the early 80s, we had a computer lab in our elementary school. So we were afforded some really nice things. But also, I mean, you were very close to that industry. And so as I was growing up, there were opportunities to do some volunteer work and even go over kind of some of these, it was STEM before it was STEM like programs where you could go over and do some shadow days with some of these larger companies, industrials in particular, and see what it is they were doing and what that was all about. And you're right, my dad would always tell me, he'd say, Robin, this is, you're great at math and science. You should be an engineer because they are always the boss, and you need to be the boss. And so that's how I got interested in particularly in engineering. Was starting to look at chemical, but ended up down a pathway of petroleum.
So you went to Texas A&M for what you said, petroleum engineering. Growing up around the refineries, you weren't interested in chemical engineering, or I know that you mentioned before that you did an internship actually that really changed your mind on what direction you want to go. Can you tell us about that internship and why it was so impactful? But also, looking back today and where we're at and where you're at in your role, would you still have picked petroleum engineering as your degree?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. And so as I was growing up, we were, I'd say, solidly middle class, but my parents didn't have a lot of money set aside for college. And so they were very encouraging for me to not just make very good grades, but to apply to as many scholarships as possible. And so I did a lot for engineering directly to different schools. And one of the scholarships I applied to was for the Society of Petroleum Engineers in the Gulf Coast section. And I received a number of them, including that one, which was enough to cover my school. So I was very excited and proud of that accomplishment. But right after graduating high school, I got a call from SPE as part of that process for that interview, or for that scholarship you interviewed, and they had kind of matched me with a potential internship for that summer. So I got offered to go work right out of high school. I was still 17 years old. I'm one of those younger summer babies. But got an opportunity to work for Diamond Offshore Drilling in Houston, and so drilling contractor, and go in their office, but also had a chance to go see one of their semi-submersibles that was docked in Galveston. But start to learn the industry a little bit, even just reading the daily drilling reports, kind of learning the lingo, what all of the acronyms and abbreviations were, but starting to see some of the cool technologies. And I think that was what really kind of sealed the deal for me that summer, was seeing what petroleum really was. And so when I went to my new student orientation at the end of the summer, I went in and switched, although I think they didn't even have me at chemical engineering. I think by alphabetical, I was listed as aerospace. So I guess it was wide open for me to select which engineering I wanted to join, but firmly made that decision to get into petroleum, and went and met with the department head and decided that, yeah, that was going to be great. At the time, it was still a very small department, really trying to attract people, which is why they had a lot of these scholarships. But that's a good thing, having a small class where all of your colleagues and your classmates, you know your professors and instructors quite well. So that was the good news once you get past some of those first engineering weed out classes that you have your freshman and sometimes early sophomore years. Once I got into the discipline coursework, it was a lot of fun, and some lasting friendships there.
And
yeah, internships are very important. So if you're in college and listening to this, apply to as many internships as you possibly can, because it does give you an opening into what your life will look like in the future. And it's great that your internship, you enjoyed it and you liked it and you decided that that's what you wanted. But for a lot of people, they may go into an internship and say, I never want to do this again in my life.
That's
Good
right.
thing this was only a summer,
Yeah, and each summer it was I interned every summer with a different company. Part of the petroleum department's goal and mission was to make sure every student graduated had at least one, if not more than one, summer internship within the industry. And so I got to kind of try out different size companies and style companies. So I mentioned the drilling contractor. I worked one summer in the field for Conoco before it was ConocoPhillips. I spent a summer with Texaco before it became Chevron Texaco, and then my final summer was with Anadarko up in the Woodlands. And so kind of a very large super major to, at the time, a little bit smaller of an independent. And so trying to find that right fit for me. So it was a great opportunity for me to find out, what style company I wanted to begin my career with. Recognizing, you can always, move around and try out different things, but I found that to be a really great place to get started for me. I got responsibility day one, and because I was ready to hit the ground running. Yeah. I wanted to go and get out to the field.
I love that. You can really see your passion just when you're talking about it. When you started your career at Anadarko, where you actually ended up spending 17 years, throughout your time there, did you have like sponsors and mentors? And how do you think they impacted your trajectory? Because a lot of times what we hear from our guests is, they had somebody in particular that really sponsored them when they weren't in the room. And we find that to be a very important way to succeed, especially as women. How did that impact you? And was there anybody in particular that helped you along the way?
Absolutely. I know a lot of large companies have very formalized mentoring programs, and we tried that off and on over the years. And, sometimes it's a good fit relationship and sometimes it's not, but it's usually those ones that just form. Sometimes it could even be a direct supervisor, or a colleague as you're the young new engineer, especially as we moved our folks around in different groups. You had to learn a new discipline. Maybe I started off in operations focusing on production and completion, but when I got to reservoir, it was all new, and I had to learn how to do very technical, detailed work, including reservoir simulation and integrated production modeling, which meant I had to learn a whole new skill set. And so it's great to go to those more experienced and sometimes even the technical gurus to learn from. But the sponsorship piece is really key. And I think a lot of that just comes through really performing good work, showing what you can do, but taking initiative, volunteering for some of those one-off projects that maybe others don't want, because I think that's how you'll build that inner, working relationship, and people want to sponsor you. And so over the years, I certainly had a number of those. Again, sometimes it was my direct supervisor, but I was once offered a business advisory role that was kind of a few steps away from what I was doing at the time. I didn't even realize what it was, but I had like my boss's boss was sponsoring me to go into that. And after I worked in that job, which was basically for our COO, he became one of my key sponsors. And it's great to have those folks, but then sometimes they leave. And so when your sponsor leaves the company, you also have to make sure you've kind of built out your brand of who you are before that, so that way you've got other people who will vouch for you behind closed doors. And then now, certainly, as my career has progressed, certainly do that for others, and particularly looking for those top performing women, because it's a little different for us in this industry. There's a lot fewer of us, and making sure that those opportunities are being presented, or even just that questions are being asked. Not assuming that somebody doesn't want a certain role because of a family situation. You always have to ask, and so that's sometimes just vouching for someone, saying, "Well, have you asked her, or have you asked him?" That's a great way to help sponsor someone.
As you went on through your career, especially with 17 years at Anadarko, and then you went on to having 2 chief executive officer titles, and now, even bigger roles with VPs, and you made it to the top of several companies in the last few years. What do you think prepared you over the 17 years of you starting off at Anadarko in terms of gaining that leadership experience? Did you ever, you're sitting at the table right now. How, did it take you a progress? Was there mentors along the way, or coaching, or did you always have the confidence of, I'm going to sit at the table and I want to be part of these conversations? Or do you find like there was a journey to sit at the table?
Definitely a journey. And yeah, there were coaches and tools along the way. Sometimes you have to ask for them. Sometimes they were presented. I think a lot of it was just being willing to get out of my comfort zone and accept different roles. Sometimes you're told this is where you're going next, but sometimes you're offered and said, "Hey, would you like to do this or that?" And the one that makes you the most uncomfortable is probably the one you should go do next, because it's probably because it's something that you're lacking and you need to go try that out. So for me, taking on roles like going into investor relations, and then later running that as an engineering background, and I really had to get my financial chops behind me. And so it was a lot of learning on the job, but I really enjoyed it. It's especially the external engagement piece, where you're getting to meet and talk to investors from all around the world, some of the brightest minds, and kind of get their perspectives on how they see the market evolving. And so it was a great stair stepper to getting into those top executive roles, that you really have that great perspective as you're thinking about things like strategy and capital allocation, and how you manage a portfolio, but also how you really lead people. And so we also had some good training inside Anadarko on the leadership side. We had some leadership programs that were coming about right as I was taking on my first supervisory role. So I was the beneficiary of that, thanks to some of my predecessor leaders. And just having those tools, how to develop a team, how to figure out what motivates different folks, how to have crucial or critical conversations. These are things that can be actually developed over time. And I think that's really key as we're looking at our leaders, that we make sure we're giving them those tools instead of just throwing them in and saying, here's your team, you're now a supervisor. I think the one thing that always sticks in my mind from that is when you're a leader, half of your goal is to make sure everyone's getting together and working for the greater goal, whatever that vision is, but the other half is developing those people. And so you have to really set time apart to do that and think about development plans for each individual. And that can be very time consuming. And so that's why we say, a true leadership or management position may not be for everyone. You really have to be committed to do that, or it just may not be a good fit. And, for some people, climbing up a technical ladder and doing a lot of that advisory work may be a great fit too. We need folks to do all sorts of things. And so,
yes, really definitely these type of roles. Yes, these type of roles are definitely not for the faint of heart. It comes with a lot of stress and a lot of responsibility. So when we first spoke to you about just your story, I was shocked at just how many things have happened in the last 5 years for you. And I wanted to kind of dig in a little bit of how you managed. So in 2018, you became president and CEO of Western Midstream. This company was formed by Anadarko to acquire, own, develop, and operate midstream assets. Shortly after that, Anadarko was acquired by Oxy in 2019. So lots of changes there. Then you went on to become president and CEO of Noble Midstream Partners until July of 2021. And shortly after, Chevron acquired it. So I remember when you were first telling us this story, I was just trying to put myself in your shoes where you start a role, you have this big title, and then something happens. Then you go, and then it happened twice. So, you've been through so many ups and downs, then COVID hits, and you're managing a business through very uncertain times. Can you tell us a little bit about just what you've learned through such a difficult journey in the last few years?
Yeah, I think it's been a common theme all through COVID. That's a big change that globally we all experience, but it's resiliency, right? How do you build that? How do you lead during uncertainty? And I think it is something that as well can be learned and developed. Kind of learning by doing in my case. I think I've actually built a lot of this skill set when I was in investor relations. It's a lot of thinking on your feet. You never know what the news flow will be on any given day. And when somebody, who's going to be calling when your phone rings, we picked it up and answered and listened and to see what it was. And so it made the job very interesting, but also taught you that, things can happen in real time and you don't always have that holding statement. And so you have to be able to, leverage those working relationships you have with the folks that you talk to regularly and be smart about it. So I think that really helped me getting into early 2019. So I think I was just about to have my first earnings call as the new CEO role. And that's when I got the call, and it's all been disclosed in the S4, but that it was originally Chevron was going to make an offer on Anadarko. So worked through some diligence there, and the rest is history with Oxy coming in. But if you remember that spring, it was very uncertain who it was going to be and what the outcome was going to be. And you had two companies looking to acquire Anadarko that had very different comments around what they were going to do with the MLP, which I was leading, and all of our marketing organization. And so I kind of had the learning by doing on how do you lead people through that. And what I found was just getting small groups together and kind of letting them talk amongst themselves. And what I found was just kind of providing that venue, saying, I don't have all the answers, but let's talk about it here. Let's not gripe at the water cooler and get everyone more stressed out. Let's have a real dialogue. What could be the good outcome? What are we worried about? And I think as people had come from both either Chevron or Oxy, they said, oh, well, I know someone over here, or I used to work there, and it's actually pretty great. And I think a lot of the fears got pushed aside. And so I've kind of used that same format going through COVID. I got over to Noble Energy, was leading Noble Midstream Partners at the beginning of 2020. COVID hits. We had to make some very difficult decisions with personnel. We had part-time and furlough for a while before we had to do a reduction of force, only to then have an announcement Chevron's coming to acquire us. So again, tremendous uncertainty, middle of a pandemic, just trying to get my teams together, get in front of them, even though it had to be virtually, unfortunately. But getting people together, providing that format and that opportunity for folks to just kind of talk about it and be there for folks, right? It's being transparent. If you don't know or you can't say, you just say that. But I think not, hiding away doesn't help. You have to be present for folks. And so that was, kind of, I got to use those same tools that I had used over at Anadarko to help lead teams through that. And when I think something I'm really proud of was just kind of staying through that take private in 2021 and making sure folks, got situated, into whether they were staying in Chevron or, had plans to exit and go do something else. It's, really taking the time. Again, half of that job as a leader is to develop those people and to make sure that people had a good path forward. That's what I did my last few weeks there. And I'm really, really happy I did. And it's such a great sense of pride when you can see those folks succeeding in different roles in different places, even today, now that the market's a little bit better.
Yeah.
It certainly feels different in this commodity price environment. We have other stressors and things going on. But I hope that they built some of that resiliency in as well, that, hey, we can manage through hard times together, and hopefully learned how we can do it as a team.
You can really tell that you have that people first mentality, which really shows like why you're so recognized in this industry for all the leadership that you've done. So thank you for that. And you're in a really unique position. There's a lot of women, and we see it across not just in oil and gas, but in every industry, that never get to make it to that CEO C-suite level. And you've had the opportunity twice, and then now again at Talos Energy as an executive position there. What do you think is holding women back, and what is your analogy on like the glass ceiling? Because you've obviously crushed it, broke it, and ran through it. So, how do you think in 2022, how are we doing? And how are you able to be able to basically be that front runner for us?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say we made a lot more progress. I kind of look back and you look at some statistics from even 20 years ago, when I was beginning my career, and it hasn't moved that much. But in the last few years, we are starting to see it. And I don't think there's just one issue. I think it's kind of the whole pipeline. We've got to recruit early and attract people. Back to your earlier question, which maybe I didn't fully answer, is would I still go into petroleum? And I think so. I think energy in general it's the sector that every other sector relies on. I think as people start really starting to appreciate and understand what energy means, and where even the electricity at the wall, where that comes from, there's more appreciation there, and that we're really a technology industry, and we can leverage that. So I think attracting more women into some of those technology STEM type roles starts early, but then we have to really look for those sponsorship opportunities along the way. That first promotion to manager, supervisor is key. But then you start to see the numbers really fall off as you get to those senior leadership positions or even the C-suite. And that's where, whether it's sponsorship, it's again asking people instead of just making assumptions, and sometimes trying to challenge folks to put them into different roles, but also realizing the way we always did it is not necessarily the right way, and we can talk about different flexible work environments and how we can make this happen. That it's not necessarily the way things worked in the 80s in the oil field, and I think being more flexible for everyone is great for all of our workforce. And so thinking about things a little bit differently and what it takes. Yes, there are sacrifices to being at the senior leadership level. It's a huge commitment, but I think there's ways to balance it and make it all work. Especially if you build a good team around you and you've got folks that you can lean on and that have that accountability that they can take something and run. I think if you're a really good leader and you build that out, it really frees you up and allows you to focus on what you need to focus on. And that's the key, I think, is do what only you can do, and then allow others to do everything else.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned, and you're right. Looking at the stats, we're better off than 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Women are at a way better place now, but you're right. In the last 20 years or so, the needle has been moved very, very little. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but we, at the end of the day, we are progressing as a whole. So that's positive. When you were offered to become CEO for the very first time, when this was brought to you, did you have a little bit of that imposter syndrome kind of creep in, or doubts of whether you should take this because of the responsibility, the stress, and just the work-life balance that may come with the title, in the sense that, did you feel like, okay, if I take on this title and this role, I'm going to have to unbalance a little bit my balance at home and not be as present as I'd like to, because now my focus is this new CEO role? Can you tell us a little bit of just when you decided to take it, what was your thinking behind it?
Yeah, no, I definitely felt that, everyone's referred to this imposter syndrome. I think that's normal. I think if you got a little humility to yourself, and you set the ego aside for a second, you realize, that you understand the importance of these top roles. And that, yeah, you're talking about what am I doing to help this entire workforce? And you kind of think of it in that sense. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot sitting on your shoulder. And decisions you're making really impact all of those people's lives, their livelihoods, but also now you've got a whole shareholder base and working with the board. And so it is a lot of pressure, and you kind of have to figure out how that's going to work for you. But I think for me over the years, I've realized you kind of have to figure out what are your non-negotiables. I will set aside this many hours to do this, but over here, this is important to me. For me, I wanted to stay in Houston, so that was one of my non-negotiables. Of I will live and work in the greater Houston area. Happy to travel, but I wasn't going to take a position somewhere away because I've got everything I need from a family support system with my kids here. And so you have to kind of figure out for yourself what those are early. If you want to try to have it all, they say you can't. I think you can. You just have to realize that it's not always I don't really believe work-life balance. There's a pendulum, and it's going to swing back and forth during different parts of your career, maybe even different months, depending if it's quarter end or year end or whatever else is going on. And you just have to kind of figure out how you're going to navigate that and lean on those extra resources, whether it be your team members, your family at home. My husband's extremely supportive of me, and it's always a discussion of, can we do this together? If I go take this, how are things going to change? What are we going to do a little differently? Recognizing that it impacts everyone. Yeah, it's real, and you gotta think through it and understand what that means for you and your situation.
No, thank you for sharing that. And, going away from professional career, but more on a personal note, talking about really hard situations, you are a breast cancer survivor, and we have the numbers to show that 1 in 2 women and 1 in 3 men will develop cancer in their lifetime, which is just really devastating when you think about it. Can you bring us back to that day you found out about your diagnosis, and what would you tell those going through a hard season in their life, and how to stay positive? Because knowing just even the amount of listeners that we have on this podcast, there's somebody impacted on a daily basis by cancer. So what are some of the things that kept you going and kept you positive and basically not holding you back from where you're at today?
No, absolutely. People are always like, are you willing to share this story? And I always, absolutely. If I can have one person make a better decision for themselves, then it's worth it. So I was pretty young. I just had my second son, who I guess he was about a year old. I had just turned 30, and found something. And so went to the doctor. They kind of dismissed it a few times, kept going back, advocating for myself and family. I'm literally at work in my office at Anadarko and get a phone call from the doctor's office. And that's when they break the news to you. And I called my husband, and, I think he was in disbelief. He got the whole, what, are they sure? I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're sure. They're not going to call and tell me that. I'm like, they did a biopsy. They're sure. I said, I'm going to call and get a surgeon, and we'll go figure this out. But also the next thing I did was run down the hall and go talk to my boss. I know he was a little taken aback, but I guess he's a true engineer like me, and we're problem solvers. So, everyone approaches these very memorable moments in their life differently. But for us, it was like we wanted information. So he told me after the fact that he went home and was like researching everything that night. And same with me, I was trying to figure out what my next steps were. I was very fortunate. I was able to actually get into a surgeon's office that evening. I found one who would stay late for me. So that meant a lot to me, that I was like, all right, this is the guy.
Yeah.
And was able to get a plan. For me, it was about getting a plan in place, knowing what it was going to look like, and just realizing it was something I was going to go through. Fortunately, I caught it fairly early. I had to go through all the chemo rounds, did radiation, did a series of surgeries, all of that. But I think it was just knowing that, I had my family support, but my work family was very supportive too. And, whatever I needed to do, they were there. But somehow I was able, I think it kind of kept me going, just to have a lot going on, being busy. It kind of keeps you focused, where you're not sitting there worried about everything. I mean, doing chemo is not fun. It's not, but I did learn that a lot of it is your mindset. I think I had six rounds. My fourth one was pretty hard, but by the time and they say as it gets in your system, it kind of builds up. So it's supposed to get a little harder each time. And I think it was because mentally I was not in a great spot on that fourth treatment. I didn't feel so great after. But by my fifth and sixth one, I saw the light at the end of the road. I was very excited about it. And, I had gotten treatment and out having dinner right afterwards. And I think it was all about that mindset. So that power of positive thinking, I've experienced it and how it can really change how you physiologically feel. So there is a lot of that. It's that mindfulness of having that choosing to be optimistic and looking ahead, whether it's at work or at home. And I really do believe that sometimes, I'm in a mood and you get to work and things aren't going great. And I almost tell myself, I'm going to choose to be in a good mood. And, it's like they say, if you start to smile, you actually start to feel better. And so it's kind of along those lines. You kind of have to tell yourself, I'm just going to choose to be the optimist today, see the good things, see the good in people, and then hope that spreads around, because it's very easy to go the other direction. There's so much bad stuff going on.
Yeah.
But knowing that you can lean on people, and I've coached some other friends and team members who've had some of these health things, and they're like, should I tell people? And I'm like, if you just be honest with your team, you certainly don't have to disclose things, but I think if people recognize that you have something you're going through, you're going to find support. Generally, most people will understand, especially if you're cutting in and out on something. If they know yet you're going through something, it's a different approach than just someone saying, well, I don't know where they're at or what's going on. I think that's important to realize that most people will give you that benefit. You just have to show a little bit of vulnerability. So if you're willing to show that, I think it can be a good thing.
Mm.
Yes, thank you so much for being open and sharing. And I've seen a few coworkers and just close friends go through something similar in the last few years. And I think everybody takes it very differently. Some will thrive through it. Some want to take a step back. They want to take some time off of work, whatever situation it is. But I have seen, employers really go above and beyond to help, and I think as a message is it's okay if you do take a year off or two. It's not going to affect you at the end of the day. We've had people on the podcast who've taken leave of absences from 1 to 7 years. And at the end of the day, they still made it pretty high in a company. So, and I think we're very hard on ourselves, and especially you, Robin, you have this mentality of, hard worker, keep going, climbing, you wanted to achieve a lot. And then you get this kind of news and then it puts you down in the sense that, well, I can't do all of that right now. I can't focus necessarily on my career. You have bigger things to worry about. And, did you, in that moment, did you take a step back at work, or did you just try to push through it? Do you feel like it affected
in the role I was in? I was asked to travel some, and I made the decision not to, just, being immunocompromised. I decided I would stay out of the airports, and that was fine. But, I decided I'd kind of just push through it. I didn't take a ton of time off. This is just my personality. Like you said, it's different for everyone. I was able to kind of go every third week, and I would go on a Thursday afternoon and go follow up on Friday, and then just sort of have a miserable weekend to be back at work on Monday. I certainly didn't have to do it that way, but that was just kind of me. But you're right. I think people, we've got this, especially the American business approach of, it's not 9 to 5, it's 7 to 7. And, you have to be quiet if you're taking a leave of absence for whatever reason. I just don't think that's the case anymore. People understand and different circumstances, and certainly having taken maternity leave twice, and that worked out great for me, where I was able actually to wrap up a role I was in. And when I came back to something different, which is nice when you can kind of hand off to someone. I would recommend that to everyone out there. If you're able to do that and completely unplug and not have to worry about it and have that special focus time on family, that was fantastic. I am so glad I did it that way.
Robin, I wanted to ask you something about that. You've had 2 boys. Massiel and I are in the thick of the early stages. Kylie is almost 2, and I think Sky's almost a year and a half or getting to that point. And it is difficult in those years, in those early years. They need you all the time. And not everybody around you understands because their kids are older or they're already out of the house. And so, going through your roles and the maternity leave and the things that you had to do, what kind of advice can you give to young moms? And like, how were you able to manage it in those early days where it is difficult because, you just had your first or your second kid and you're really trying to manage it all still. So what was some advice that you can give our listeners?
Well, if you can work and live close, that's great. Because you're right, you want to be able to just jot home or go visit at the preschool when it's, reading day. It's those moments you can't get back. So you have to prioritize. One of the things I heard another working mother say years ago that I found really works is when they get a little older and you can actually talk to them about it, is ask the kids what's important to them. Sometimes the event you may be trying to get to, they don't really care. It is the one-off. I want you to come for reading time, not for this other big sporting event or something. And they'll help you prioritize, which is funny because it seems so intuitive that you just ask them, hey, if I can only come to one of these, which one do you care about? Or maybe they don't care about one of them at all. But I think it's, you gotta make that time. Like I said, the pendulum's going to swing back and forth, but you got to recognize those moments are only there for a limited time. My older one I was saying before we started the recording here, just got his keys, and so has his license and kind of off driving around now. And I kind of miss that where every now and then I drop him off in the mornings, and because that's when he'd really talk to me. So it's, I have to find other ways on when I can find out what's going on inside of my teenage son's head.
I love that.
Those little things. Yeah. Just like taking the kid to school, hey, I want to do that, every other week or once a week or whatever that looks like. I think you just got to figure it out. So that's where it comes back to what's important and figuring out how you're going to make it work. It doesn't have to be, we're doing something every day, but make the special time special when you can.
Thank you so much for that, Robin. And I think, a common theme throughout, your podcast today has really been communication, from what you did as a leader, communicating through all those roles and changes that you made, to communicating to your family, to communicating to your kids and figuring out what they want. A really big piece of it is just being a good communicator and understanding your feelings and also having empathy for others. And you really showed that. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this great advice. And we're so happy to have you. And we really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Happy to tell the story.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Robin.